the parts of this where he is actually making theoretical claims, he says they're not producing value, they're not productive laborers. There was a point in his debate with me where he said that he seemed to be, maybe I was misinterpreting him. I have watched very little Haz outside of my conversation with him, so maybe I've got his view wrong, right? But he seemed to be linking this to this idea that that they're not like transforming, like that they're not like the, oftentimes when Marx talks about the labor process in capital, he talks about, taking the materials that are given to you by nature and transforming them to things that meet human use value. And that's the sort of original nature-imposed necessity of labor that takes these sort of contingent social forms, given different modes of production. And he seemed to be saying that Starbucks baristas aren't doing that, which I found really confusing because just look, I'm a simple man, but like, if you're grinding coffee beans and straining hot water through them and, foaming milk and all that stuff, it seems to me that you are in fact transforming materials taken from nature into things that meet human use values. So I'm very confused about how this isn't productive in that sense. So some of what I've seen him say since then is that he sort of appeals to the stuff that Marx says in Capital Volume 2 about productive and unproductive labor, and suggests, because it's something that like Marx says about clerks at one point, that service workers, which in head Starbucks baristas, because they're in some sense service workers, are doing unproductive labor in that sense. Which is also confusing though, right? Because like if you look at some of if you look at like some of what Marx and I guess Engels in one case like said about this, like there is this quote, Jean Baudrillard quoted this on Twitter today, a discussion about this. It's from Principles of Communism. The proletariat is that class in society, so this is Engels, which lives entirely from the sale of its labor. It does not draw profit from any kind of capital. Whose weal and woe is life and death, whose sole existence depends on the demand for labor, hence on the change in state of business and the vagaries of unbridled competition. This is the proletariat, the class of proletarians, in a word, the working class of the 19th century. Doesn't seem to be a lot of distinction there about the kind of labor. And you say, okay, well, maybe that's Engels. How about Marx? Well, if you look at, so this is from the Economic and Philosophical Manuscripts of 1844. Marx writes, the cook in the hotel produces a commodity for the person who, as capitalist, has bought her labor. The head proprietor, and so he says that unlike if you employ a cook, as like a personal servant, says okay, that's not productive in Marx's sense because there's capital isn't valorizing itself. It's like what we were joking about with Scientology, the MCM cycle isn't in operation there because the cook who's employed as a domestic servant isn't producing the value that goes back into their own wages. They're not the source of what Marx calls the various points the variable capital fund, which means like the part of the capitalist profits out of which the workers themselves are paid. Whereas he points out here that the cook who works in a hotel is producing stuff that people are paying for that is then going into their wages, right? They are producing their own variable capital fund that they are paid out of. And this one I found particularly striking because honestly, short of getting into a DeLorean and visiting the 21st century, a cook in a hotel is about the closest possible analogy Marx could have come up with for a Starbucks barista in the time and place he lived in, right?
Minus hair dye, of course, which is a really important factor that we can't forget. A little moralizing, a little reactionary, a little effeminate. Yeah.
And you might still wonder about, people like, me in my non-podcast life. One of the things I do is I teach a couple of adjunct classes at Rutgers. And so I might actually be on strike very soon. We just held a strike authorization vote. And it was a 94% yes for strike authorization. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a strike, but we'll see what happens. They're on spring break right now. We'll see if there's a breakthrough at the negotiating table over spring break. But think, okay, well, what would Marx think about this? Because I'm not, I mean, okay, no blue hair dye. I've got that going for me, but I'm not transforming any physical materials into things for human use value. That in when I teach probability or inductive logic classes at Rutgers.
Minds, Ben.
Well, it's interesting you say that. So here's Karl Marx in Capital. On this, he says, a schoolmaster is a productive laborer when, in addition to belaboring the heads of his scholars, he works like a horse to enrich the school proprietor. That the latter has laid out his capital in a teaching factory instead of in a sausage factory does not alter the relation.
That's the kind of the whole point, and Haz likes to talk about the proximity to production, but his followers like to talk about the type of production. Like, I don't know if you were looking at all of these threads where Gene posted that Cook quote there, which is great. They're talking about vital and integral and things that help society in certain ways, and it starts to boil down to all sorts of things that weren't really said or spoken about with regards to class. And then what they'll say is that it needs to be, again, manual labor, heavy lifting, men without shirts on with muscles and things of that nature. They want the sexy Stalinist propaganda poster gentleman to be the proletarian. And it breaks down even when you ask, what about what was the example that they gave, which was befuddling? Oh, someone who owns a construction company of their own and they do the work. He was like, well, he's a proletarian. We just said that he owns it and he also does the work. We're talking about petty bourgeois, but none of this ever checks out with them. And if they don't deem the kind of work that you do to be productive in the way that they mean, then that's not what class is. And God forbid you have the wrong color hair, or you're gender fluid or some other reactionary bullshit that they have problems with. Then that's the absolute worst. Dunkin' Donuts people, on the other hand, which came up in your debate, which was hilarious. Dunkin' Donuts people have better sense than to try to organize, unlike those privileged, whiny Starbucks employees. What else did they say, which was wonderful, Ben? You were accused of, in a capitalist realist sense, I suppose, that you rather believe in apocalypse than the end of McDonald's. That's a direct quote that was paid.
Oh, so it's the Frederick Jameson thing about it's easier to imagine the end of the world, the end of capitalism.
Absolutely, except in this time, it's you believing in apocalypse and not wanting to part ways with McDonald's because you're a soy burger.
Yeah,
don't forget it.
I mean, I don't know, man. It's I could understand that if you're go to Starbucks, right? It's you're probably some sort of suspect latte swirling liberal, but if you, surely once you get done with a day of doing dignified manual labor, I mean, it's come on, are you really sorry for going to McDonald's?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And for not drinking Folgers at home, which was another thing that I saw. We don't need Starbucks. But that's the thing, is they're not relating to commodities and the sales of commodities and MCM and capitalism. And anyways,
you could look, there are lots of things that are made in factories you can make in your home.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, you can build, your own furniture if you want. Does that mean carpenters are not proletarians?
Yeah, or garment workers, right? I mean, that's something that's been made in homes, since time immemorial. And also, I would point out, there are reasons that, people like to get coffee that they don't make in their own home. I don't know. I mean, even if we lived, if we lived under socialism, I think people would still, like to do things like meet people for coffee.
How bougie of you.
Yeah.
But the thing is also, like, what if your job is stealing all of your time and you don't have that time to make coffee at home in the morning? You have to run out the door to please your boss as well. And bring him a coffee along the way.
Oh, sorry. This reminds me of I believe it's Orwell's The Road to Wigan Pier, where the people sort of chastise the workers in these coal mines who are like getting like candy or cigarettes or like, oh, it's going to be unhealthy for them. And it's like, they are coal miners. Let them have this one thing that makes them feel good. Like, it seems like they're making an aesthetic. They're like trying to make a distinction without a difference, because
Totally.
I did a discussion earlier on my podcast I do, where we were talking about the professional managerial class, like as a concept. And one of the things that I find frustrating about that determination is, like, I think it's interesting, but ultimately it's a flattening exercise. So like the CEO of like a Fortune 500 company, who is both a part of that managerial elite or whatever, but who also kind of owns the company, is essentially on the same theoretical plane as like the assistant manager of an Applebee's. Like, it's really strange. And so I think that these sort of weird aesthetic preferences are odd, given that, we're transforming other things into other things, whether it's coffee or it's coal or it's, writing words. Like, I find that those distinctions are sort of anathema to the kind of solidarity and social building that people would need to do in order to actually transcend this system.
And if Haz is trying to appeal to the working class in the same way that, Trump did with MAGA, then you're missing the fact that the productive labor in factories is really low right now. And most of American working class are in the service industry.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive postgames on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.